welcome. You are joining the Native American Language Resource Center, our summer series on how to create an immersion school. This session is focused around language proficiency and assessment. So before we jump into the content, let's go ahead and get disclaimed. Oh, shucks. Let's go back. So this presentation was produced under the U.S. Department of Education, contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises Incorporated. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred. Awesome. So now that we've got this claimed, I would love to introduce you to the TA team who's been working on this series. Casey Morgan. Hey, Casey.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad to have you in today's session.
Awesome. And then, of course, myself, Olani Lily. I am with the TA team, and welcome, everyone. Also in today's presentation, joining us a little later towards the end to share their work as it relates to language assessment will be Kevin. I don't think Dara was able to make it, but she is also part of Navajo Preparatory School. Welcome, Kevin.
Oh, yeah, everybody. Thank you.
Awesome. So we look forward to hearing from them and from Kevin, and he's going to be sharing again the work that they've been doing around Navajo Preparatory School language proficiency as well as assessment. But let's get into what we're going to be going over today. The first part of the agenda, we're going to be talking sort of just providing some context around this series. And then we're going to get into defining language proficiency. And we're actually going to do some work together if you haven't done it already. And maybe you do have a definition about language proficiency, but maybe it's a great time to sort of relook at it and hone it, maybe do some small tweaks, or just confirm that this is actually an appropriate definition for your school as far as language proficiency goes. And then we're going to look at how do you assess language proficiency. And finally, towards the end, again, Navajo Preparatory School, Kevin will be sharing their model and the work that they did to create both define language proficiency for their school, as well as how they developed an assessment to measure the progress of their students. So for today's session, our objectives are to create help you create your own definition of language proficiency, as well as to explore a process for developing a language assessment that measures progress and proficiency as you are defining it. Just a little housekeeping I want to share is if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, and at different times during the session, I will pause and check to see if there's any questions in the chat and be able to address those questions. We also, at the end of the session, have a time where we will be able to also take another pause and maybe depending on the number of people participating can actually come off of mute and ask your question. So lots of opportunities to speak and to get your questions answered. So let's dive in to the content. So what are we doing? What is this NALRC summer series? We heard through listening sessions and engagement sessions, really an interest from the field to dive into the topic of how to create immersion schools. And so what we've done is created this series, which provides both live webinars, which you are in one today. We are also creating podcasts, blog posts, as well as tools to help you maybe start an immersion school, or to also, maybe you're in the process, maybe you're starting your first year in immersion school. Maybe it's a time to have some reflection and look back and maybe gain some additional ideas and thoughts and tools to help you to really develop a strong language immersion school. These are the topics that we have been covering. These are the overviews of each session, and this both relates to both these webinars as well as the podcast. And we've got amazing subject matter experts and people from the field who are providing and lending their experience and expertise to this series. Right now, we are in session 4. We have added an additional session, session number 6, which is around operations for success. So the whole first part of the series is really focused on both engagement of community, figuring out what is the best model for your immersion school, talking about curriculum and teacher training, and then of course assessment. And then the 5th series will get into technology and what people are doing out there as it relates to language and technology. And so we felt like we really needed another session to talk about, the operations, the daily running of an immersion school. And so we created a new session, and that's our number 6. But for today, one of the first questions we are going to dive into is really understanding what language proficiency means to us. And when I say us, that's you folks. And so starting out your new immersion school, it's really important because your real focus is around the preservation, the maintenance, and for some of you, the renormalization of your native language within communities. We really want to do some work and take some time for you to think about, critically think about what does language proficiency mean for your school, your community, and your language. So when you're talking about language proficiency, there are really 4 skills that are involved in that. The first one is listening, then there's speaking, reading, and then finally writing. These are all elements of proficiency that you will want to define for your program. These skills, of course, cross various content areas, including math, language arts, history, and science. And so we know and are aware that immersion schools at different levels are teaching content like math and history and science through the native language. And so that's why we're going to start with language proficiency, because then that should be the thread that is running through all of those different content areas. You are, as an immersion program, really looking at how you are integrating language proficiency into all content areas, into all learning experiences, both in and out of the classroom. Listening proficiency is really the ability to understand spoken language in different contexts. Speaking proficiency is the ability to speak a language fluently and accurately. Now, I know a lot of indigenous and native language come from an oral tradition. And so a lot of immersion schools, beginning from very young age, whether it's preschool, early learning, all the way through, really focus on the development of both the student being able to listen and hear and comprehend that native language, as well as to appropriately speak proficiently that native language within the context of the conversation or the way that it's been speaking. And then a lot of times these indigenous languages were introduced into putting their language into written form. And so then the next area of proficiency is really around the ability to comprehend written language in different formats. And then, of course, again, being able for a student to be able to take that reading, that speaking and listening, and be able to communicate that through written proficiency. And so that, again, is really the ability to write a language correctly and coherently. So let's dive a little bit into each of these skills. Again, listening skills are in particular, our particular language involve really an oral communication. And so from when we, a lot of times people think when you are even in the womb, you are, hearing the language of your mother and the people around her, and you are already being able to process and develop listening skills. But definitely when you are born, from the moment you are born, you are learning language listening skills. It's really the first step towards comprehension, and you're developing a listening ability is very key as it relates to native language. And so I know, well, I'll stop there and provide an example after the speaking one. When you talk about speaking fluency, it's best defined by accurate use of words, sentence structure, context, and ideas. Using the contextually correct vocabulary, sentence structures, and context clues is a determinant of fluency. Also, the rate or speed in which a speaker communicates also is a measure of fluency. If a speaker needs time to find the right words, that could be a measure of your level of fluency. And also using expression, the use of tone, volume, and facial expressions is also another skill based within speaking fluency. I know if you go to an immersion school, whether it's preschool or particularly in kindergarten, when a student is first hearing language within an immersion context, I've seen teachers really having to stay in the language, use their bodies, their tone, their expression, in order to provide context clues for the learner while staying in the native language. And so listening and speaking are two really fundamental skills as it relates to language immersion and also determining proficiency. And then, of course, we get into the reading skill. Comprehension of oral language and written language are two really different skill sets. The reading skill involves understanding the meaning of written language. A person may be able to speak a language with a high level of proficiency, but be unable to have a high level of proficiency in the ability to read that language. Again, we know that it is probably easier for someone to, particularly if, let me restate that, if you are coming like in America where the main language is English and everything is written in English, if your native language utilizes the English written letters, research finds that it makes it easier for a native speaker or a native learning speaker to be able to pick up the reading skills. It's a little bit more challenging when the native language has its own, I guess, writing letters and the way that they are communicating the written language. And so that can have a higher degree of difficulty in the area of reading. It doesn't mean can't be done. There are many, many successful programs out there of native language who have their own written language that are very successful in the immersion and having high levels of reading skills. So while it may be difficult, there are definitely native languages that are having high degree of success in that area. And then of course that translates the same when you are talking about writing. Writing comes with the same challenges. And like I said, involved in reading, since writing systems vary across language. Learning to write in a second language that uses a completely different system from one that you're familiar with can be especially challenging. Also, writing doesn't come as naturally as speech. We all know if we were born into a primarily English speaking and reading culture. However, we all need to learn how to write in English, and all of us have varying degrees of ability and skill to do that, even in the more predominant language, which is English. And so you have to additionally translate that when you are in an immersion school setting. So now that we've gone through the skills, there's an additional thing you need to think about as you are trying to define proficiency for your skill, for your school. There are you want to create different levels. And these are sort of some of the standard levels when it relates to language proficiency. Of course, there's the novice. That's really maybe a student that can understand and use basic phrases and expressions related to familiar topics. At the intermediate level, that may be a learner that can communicate effectively in most situations, but may still have difficulty with more complex language and cultural nuances. An advanced learner may be, can understand and express complex ideas and opinions, and may have a near native level of fluency. And then expert, that expert level has a mastery of the language, including its subtleties and cultural references, and can use it in either a professional or academic, or in particular, I think a great litmus test for expert is to be able to use it with other experts, including, and for most part, elders who are actually native speakers. When it comes to language skill levels, you can use these, or you can also create your own. Some schools actually include a distinguished level, which is a level above expert. And so that is really where it comes into people who are probably very proficient and are able to, again, speak with, high vocabulary, very high context. Sometimes it's a lot about utilizing poetry or slangs, things that are known within the context of that particular language. So I'm going to take a moment and just pause, because we're going to get into some of you folks doing some work and think about. I'm going to check to see if there's any questions in the chat before we move on. All right. So now I want you to just really think about your school. And I think Casey's going to throw in the chat this worksheet. Oh, thanks, Casey. It's there already. So we're going to use this worksheet to really think about your program and when your students end their time with you. And I say their time with you because, you may be just starting out of preschool and you are thinking about growing in grades after that. So for right now, what I want you to think is like, okay, so we're starting a preschool, but we're going to go to the 6th grade. So already envision in your mind that 6th grader and what that expert level of skill they will have in being able to listen, to speak, to read, and to write. Now, again, some immersion schools I've seen do not focus a lot on reading and writing. They want to remain in and preserve the oral tradition of the language, and that's fine. And so your definition of proficiency may just go to speaking. But I do see more and more immersion programs that are including reading and writing in order to have a well-rounded student, and in order for that student to be able to communicate via research papers or be able to communicate via presentations in their native language. And so there have been more organizations, schools who have been including that. And so let's just take a moment for you to think about, again, what does that expert look like as it relates to listening, speaking, reading, and writing? Now, remember what we're focusing on is that student at the end of their experience within your school. So that may be up until 5th grade. It may be up until, maybe middle school, 8th grade, or for some of you, it might be high school. what skills, what will their listening skills look like at that expert level? So let's take a sixth grader. Their listening skills. What does an expert look like? So they would be able to listen maybe to long stories and comprehend long stories. They will have maybe their speaking is they have a robust vocabulary with a variety, a large toolbox of sentence structures, and be able to use those sentence structures appropriately within the context. Maybe they're reading, maybe they are being able to read, stories written in the language and are able to then communicate that back versus via an oral discussion and or in writing. Those are just some examples. And so I want to just take a moment and pause and see if you folks would come off of mute and if anybody wants to share. Anyone want to come off of mute and share? Let's take speaking. What does an expert speaker after they've left your program at whatever grade level, what skills do they have? How do you know that they are proficient in the language? No one?
I'll go. This is Linda.
Thank you.
I think they're using syntax, verb agreements, and other people can converse and comprehend what they are in fact saying.
Perfect. Thank you, Linda.
Sorry, I got disconnected. I'm back. Shucks, I missed it.
Oh, she said incorporating syntax, verb agreements, and what they're saying is able to be understood by others.
Yes, I love it. That's great. Anyone else want to share?
I can share. This is Kevin with NALRC Preparatory School.
Thanks, Kevin.
So with our system, what we had done initially was we created just simple rubrics. And we had different categories: enunciation, pronunciation, fluency, and then just vocabulary, just a different array. And but this past summer, we attended a language training for International Baccalaureate in Vancouver, and now we have to rethink our entire rubric and criterion. So we're going to be changing that up this year, but it's going to be on a multitude of levels. At the high school level, initially we did it by freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, but now we're going to have to rethink our entire rubric system and criteria-based system into levels of learning to really help students. So that's going to benefit our students and help them, instead of staying in one level the entire year, help them to progress as soon as they accomplish or we get proficient in one level, they'll go to the next. So that's what we're going to start to implement, or start to plan and then implement this year, and hopefully next year we'll have it well enough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. That brings up a great point. And that's why, again, I I was emphasizing the end of your program because, you know, a lot of times these levels can cross grade levels. So as fast as a student can progress, like Kevin was saying, you can move them along. And so it may be that you're not thinking of necessarily just about, you know, by the end of this grade level, we want them to achieve this, but you're looking at these levels of proficiency across grade levels. And that's really a decision that you need to make within your organization, like Navajo Prep, I think, is making, and redoing and relooking at their language assessment and how they're defining proficiency. So that's a great point. I also see in the chat that being able to add to the conversation in the language. Yep. Yep. That is another great measure of proficiency. You may want to, again, define like what they're adding to be able to be measurable as you are looking at this, because again, all of this definition of proficiency is really the foundational work around your assessment creation. Once you've decided on what's important for the program and where the work is going in, then you want to measure, you know, how successful and the progress of students and how they are progressing through the different levels of proficiency. Awesome. Which leads to sort of the next, it's the next slide, right? And so there is, like Kevin was saying, you know, there might be, you might not just want to have, you know, a curriculum that is bound by a year, and you might want to break it down by, again, proficiency levels or grade levels. It's always great to be able to, in your assessment, to see the progress of students from one grade level to the next. Or maybe, you know, grade level is just one measure. It could be throughout the time of the program. And so you're really looking maybe long-term, the development of a student. I've seen some schools that do both long-term as well as incremental. So they do long-term and wanting to see what the end result is and tracking a student along the way, but also utilizing incremental proficiency levels to again make sure that they are moving that student to achieve what the goal is at the end of the year, of their time with them. Sorry. Any questions, comments? This is really foundational work. And so once you have defined your level, your language proficiency, the next thing is to look at how you are stringing that work into all of your other content areas. Because again, remember, immersion schools are teaching, most of you are teaching math, science, history, art, dance, you know, whatever content areas you're teaching through the native language. And so that is a strand that should be present in all of your content areas. Oh, and I see there was a hand raised. Go ahead, come off of mute.
Hi. So I was just thinking about, you know, what it means to be proficient. I used to teach the English language development class several years ago, and what we thought was proficient in each of the different groupings: listening, speaking, reading, and writing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just interesting, you know, trying to compare that to what we're doing right now. We're trying to, you know, move toward an immersion school. So trying to see, you know, from that lens, how they differ and how they are similar. But, you know, really having to look at the language itself and see what is a good fit for our kids.
Yeah. That's, I think, when you're starting, or at least for me, when you're starting an immersion school, that's the fun stuff. I mean, because you can get really creative for yourself. I've seen schools who have, you know, as far as like process goes, they like met with elders, they've met with native speakers, they've talked with them, they've identified what proficiency is from that native language. When I say native speaker, I'm talking about someone who was raised in the language and it's the home language, and English is the second language. I know that may sound, maybe that we think that there's not that many homes, but more and more, I think as it particularly relates to native language preservation and maintenance, there are more and more push for the first language in the home to be the native language. And so even when you have elders who are proficient in the language and practitioners, utilizing them and then thinking about their level of proficiency, and then thinking about where would your student, where should they be as it relates to that sort of high level of proficiency, and what should they be able to do when they leave your program. And so this is really, when you think about immersion, this is the heart really of the work, is understanding what your children and your students will be able to do as it relates to listening, speaking, reading, and writing your native language, and defining that. The more and more specific you can get, the more that lends to better and clearer assessment, that lends to better integration of the language into all different content areas. It can also help drive your professional development through all content areas. And I know this may sound kind of goofy, but it also can connect to your teacher professional development, as well as their own teacher evaluation. I know a lot of schools utilize the teacher's growth in the language as actually part of their professional evaluation. And some schools put a lot of resources into wanting to develop higher and higher levels of proficiency with their teachers. And not also can your immersion school. So your human resource person, your registrar, your custodial staff, the more and more you can increase their level of proficiency, you are creating an environment that is truly immersion at every level. And so I know why we're focused here, really on students. In order to get them to that expert level, the theory around immersion is that everyone is speaking within that space, everyone is speaking the language. So this can be used for staff as well. Any other comments or questions, input? All right, again, I really want to really encourage you to take time, speak with your elders, speak with your native speakers, gather your teachers around, have really, meaningful discussions about this. And like Kevin said, it's something that can iterate over time. Sometimes we think we're just starting a school and we develop these levels of proficiency and we realize that the students learn much faster than we anticipated. And so sometimes you have to actually adjust in order to keep up with the students. So once we know what really matters as it relates to language proficiency, and we have a clear definition of what that means at every different level, we can now start to look at assessments. And assessments are really just a way in which we can know whether or not students are learning what we think they should be learning as it relates to the language. And I just, a lot of times we think of assessment as being a Western, but I want to make an argument that as a Native people, we've always been engaged in assessment, that most of our assessments also had real life consequences. If you weren't able to farm something well or to take care of a particular animal, plant, or place, that had a consequence on your community. And so a lot of the assessments were like, they were real and they had life consequences. I would love to share a model of assessment from my culture. Oh, why is that like that? There we go. Can you see? Oh, there we go. So we can all look into our history to find models of assessment. And again, I'd love to share this model. This story I'm going to tell you is about Keku Haupio. He was a well-known teacher who instructed the ali'i, or the chiefs, in warfare. He was the chief advisor of Kamehameha, and he taught Kamehameha how to do battle and prepare for war. If you don't know, Kamehameha was a high chief from Hawaii Island, where I live. And he was the one who united all of the islands together. Prior to Kamehameha, all of the islands had separate chiefs who ruled over those different islands. And so Keku Haupio was taught he taught various strategies of war, combat, and leadership skills. And after several series of trainings, Keku Haupio's teacher realized that he was ready for the next level. And so what he wanted to do was to conduct an assessment. And in order to determine if Keku Haupio had the skills, he needed to fight the most vicious combatant. And that was a tiger shark, a niuhi shark. And so his assessment, talking about real life consequences, was to wrestle a tiger shark in the ocean. So Keku Haupio was instructed by his instructor to prepare bundles of rancid pig and then to gather a crew to paddle out into the ocean. His teacher tied the bundles of rancid pig to the back of the canoe and instructed the canoe paddlers to paddle around in the deep ocean. Soon, and from that rancid pig, oil sort of leaked out into the ocean. And soon after, they had a large tiger shark trailing them and trailing the bundles of rancid pig flesh and oil. The shark was busy sort of like, I guess, gulping at the water in order to both take in the oil as well as trying to get those bundles of pig flesh. And Keku Haupio was very anxious as soon as he saw the tiger shark to jump into the water and to begin the assessment, to begin wrestling. But his instructor told him to wait, and ordered the canoe paddlers to continue to circle, again, continuing to trail that oil and that rancid pig flesh, with the shark continuing to gulp at the water, taking on more and more water. When Keku Haupio's teacher saw that the shark began to swim slower and was more sluggish because of all of that ocean water he was gulping, he told Keku Haupio that now it was time for him to jump in the water and wrestle the shark. And so Keku Haupio jumped in the water and he fought with the shark. And he was able to stab the shark and kill it and bring it on and tie it onto the boat or to the canoe and brought the shark in. The shark was taken to a halau, or to a covering area where the different parts of the shark were divided up, and particularly the eye, which is cultural significance, were taken and used in a final assessment ceremony. This ceremony confirmed that Keku Haupio had successfully completed his assessment and could move into the next level of training. And the ceremony was conducted with the community participating, as well as his teacher, the canoe paddlers, and of course, the different parts of the shark. So all elements of the assessment and the community were engaged in this ceremony. So what does this show us? What does this story show us about a native assessment process? One is that it was performance-based, an assessment process that allows the learner to apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities to an authentic problem. The key feature is that it requires the student to produce something such as a report, experiment, or performance that is scored against a specific criteria. Now, again, his performance was to wrestle a shark. But why wrestle a shark? Well, a shark is probably the most vicious, maybe combatant in war. And so if he could wrestle the shark down and kill it, then he could definitely be able to do battle on land with a man. The other thing this assessment shows us that is challenging and connected to expected outcomes. Shark with your hands is challenging, even if it had gulped up a whole bunch of water. But the Niuhi shark, or the target shark, again, represented the highest level of opponent that Kekuhaupio would need to fight in the world of a man. The third part is really preparation. So preparation is a part of assessment. Kekuhaupio had to prepare the bundles of rancid pig, the canoe, the rope for the bundles. Kekuhaupio poked holes in the bundles and tied the rope to the canoe and put it into the water. Again, the bundles left a trail of oil in the water that attracted that shark. And so another key aspect of a native assessment is for preparation of the actual person who's going to be assessed. Also, as you know, you saw in that explanation, at least I hope you saw, was that Kekuhaupio was set up for success. When they first started out and the shark was like really active and hadn't taken out a lot of water, it was fast moving, the teacher did not allow Kekuhaupio to jump into that water. He wanted to even I guess, make the playing field as even as possible, but also wanting to set Kekuhaupio up for success. Again, the water slowed down the shark and increased Kekuhaupio's odds at being successful. Also, what I didn't mention in that story was that the teacher coached Kekuhaupio as he waited on the canoe to jump in, because, you know, as we know with young men, and particularly when you get into an assessment and you have to perform, whether it's a young man or a young woman, you get a little nervous, you get antsy, you want to kind of get in and get it done. But the instructor really sort of coached him into the right time and right moment for him to engage in the assessment. The other thing is that it was the community was engaged in assessment. And so it wasn't just Kekuhaupio who was a part of the assessment. We had the instructor, the paddlers. We also, at the time when they had the ceremony, the community came around in order to contribute and also celebrate his success. That was a recognition of him moving on to the next level. And then the last thing was that it was connected to environment. And so Kekuhaupio was born and raised in a coastal community on Hawaii Island. And so the wrestling of the shark was appropriate for the environment in which he came from. So I want to just take a couple of minutes. I'll actually take 5 minutes. We're going to go break up into breakout rooms, just sort of randomly assigned breakout rooms. And then we will, would love for you to talk about your culture stories and to identify those, maybe the assessment strategies that are embedded in your stories. Actually, I think for time, for the essence of time and make sure we get through our content, if you could just place in the chat, maybe a strategy of assessment that is shared through your cultural stories. And as we're waiting for you to put those and share those in the chat, we can move on into different types of assessments. And so we look at assessment, we can see there are two types, summative and formative. And, you know, I think you can see in that story, the that there were both, it was primarily a summative assessment, because it was at the end of learning how to do different war strategies. But there are also formative assessments. And so what is a summative assessment? The goal of a summative assessment is really to evaluate student learning at the end of an instructional unit by comparing it against some standard or benchmark. So again, your standard or benchmark would really be your levels of proficiency that you are working on and developing. That would be your standard or benchmark as it relates to language proficiency. And so there can be different ways in which you can measure and utilize tools and methods to be able to administer a summative assessment. Also, we have the formative assessment. The goal of a formative assessment is to monitor student learning, to provide ongoing feedback that can be used by instructors to improve their teaching and by students to improve their learning, you know. So let's get into what those actually look like. And so we're commonly and very familiar with like midterm or final exams, final projects, research papers, or final performance tasks. Again, like the story I shared with you, that was a summative performance task. Also, we have a lot of schools, immersion schools in particular, who are developing portfolios that are summative portfolios of a student's work over their entire maybe quarter, semester, or even year. They allow you to evaluate student learning at the end, again, of an instructional unit, or even a quarter or a year. A lot of times, summative assessments are considered often high stakes because they are at the end of, you know, a learning unit. And like I said, or maybe even a project. If you're project-based, it might be at the end, close of a project. And then formative assessment. Formative assessments can include drawing a concept map in class to represent your understanding of a topic. Maybe for language, it's submitting a research paper or doing an oral presentation. A lot of times it's a way to present to your class. Sometimes it can be either a practice speech or maybe an impromptu, again, depending on what you are wanting to measure as it relates to language proficiency. So let's look at how would you go about selecting the right assessment type, depending on what you're trying to achieve via the assessment. And so you can see here comparison between both formative and summative. To determine what type of assessment you want to create, you can look at this chart. The purpose of the formative assessment is to really provide teachers with information to improve learning, while a summative assessment purpose is to measure the student's attainment of that standard. Formative assessments usually occur while the learning is in progress, and summative assessments occur at the end of learning. Formative assessments are focused on the learning process and progress, while summative assessments focus on the products of learning. And then, you know, formative assessments can be, they can be collaborative, where, you know, you can have students come around and work on a project together. And normally, well, even in summative, you know, you can have where a project team is coming together to maybe show the end of their research or the completion of a project. They also provide, again, and are used by the school to provide feedback, particularly formative, to provide feedback and to adjust instruction. And as well as summative is really a final evaluation of the student's learning. And so you can use this chart to really help you define what type of assessment would be most appropriate for your for measuring student proficiency. And it may be a blend of it, right? It may be that you are doing formative assessment along the way and also have a final a summative assessment at the end, again, of a unit or a project. While you are creating your assessment, here are some things you should look at. First is alignment, really unpacking your definitions of proficiency along the different levels, and really calling out and identifying all the skills that are needed in order to meet that measure or that level of proficiency. It's really helpful when you are working and considering these assessment considerations to engage your teachers in all of this, because they're seeing it live on the ground. You also want to make sure you are defining rigor and what it means for the purpose of your assessment. Really wanting to make sure that you are utilizing, you're creating prompts or questions or rubrics that are really focused on the rigor of the assessment is also very helpful. Then also precision, you want to make sure that that the assessment and the assessment questions are actually measuring what you want to measure. And this really goes through, it really is about testing questions and making sure that the question you are asking is actually measuring, what you want it to measure. And that really comes from creating the assessment and doing it, and then coming back and re-looking at the student scores and having these conversations with teachers and anybody who may be involved in the assessment development. Of course, we want to look at bias. That really occurs when an assessment provides an advantage or disadvantage to groups of students because of maybe their personal characteristics, race, gender, socioeconomic status, or religion. And I know sometimes we may think because, we are doing native language and we don't intend to, to advantage or disadvantage based on those. Sometimes some students don't have the similar experiences as other students. And so really looking at, particularly when you have questions related to a particular environment and or experience, to make sure that you are not, you are providing context that, a majority of students can apply and can relate to. And then also scoring. Scoring really means, for the purpose of, is to really think about how you are scoring and creating well-designed tools such as answer keys, scoring guides, rubrics that you will need to utilize in order to score these assessments. These are all sort of the things you need to consider as you are developing the assessment. And so I've done a lot of talking about about developing and defining your levels of proficiency. We talked about some real broad considerations as it relates to assessments. And so I would love to turn it over to Kevin to really get into and share some of the amazing work they did as it relates to Navajo Prep and their language proficiency assessment. You can come off of mute, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm here now.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you. Just let me introduce myself really quick. She Kevin Belinin, she do Twitch eatni the okay, but she do kind of something she do so just introduce myself real quick. I am the director of the Nevazad Institute with Navajo Preparatory School. Just real quick history. Our school has been in has been going since 1892 as a Methodist mission, and then we went to Methodist Academy, then we went to Navajo Academy, and in 1991 the school was redesigned and reauthorized under the Navajo Nation as a school for college preparatory school, but also language and culture preservation and revitalization. And so that's the main focus of our school, and it's embedded in our strategic plan, also our goal, our vision, and our mission statement. So we are also part of the International Baccalaureate program, and we're constantly pressuring the IB program to adopt and recognize Navajo as one of their group 3 languages. So, we're still pressuring them, and we're going to get it done. But that's just real quick history on our school. When we create these assessments, there's a whole hodgepodge of assessments we got to look at and constantly be thinking about where our students are and where they need to be. So the first one, we do diagnostic assessments. That's assessment for learning. So we always do for every grade level since I first started is those pre-assessments. Those pre-assessments are designed per grade level. So we have 4 pre-assessments for us currently right now, freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors. But that's going to change as we move towards, like I said, we're going to move towards level proficiencies rather than grade levels. And so those assessments might increase. And so those assessments we use, I create, we use a program called Edulastic, and you'll see a little snippet of that a little bit later. So we do that. We also do ipsative assessments, which is assessments as learning. So if a student got a 71 and they're pre, where are they at since then? How many levels have they increased? Where are they at since then? And when we reassess them, we look at mid-level and then go and then assess and see how many levels they've increased since then too as well. And so we're looking at how rigorous the assessments are and how rigorous the level of instruction that the students receiving and where are they moving forward. And then at the end, summative assessments, which is our post-examination, and constantly we are doing formative assessments, and that's assessments for learning. And so initially what we did, that first column, skill-based assessment, it's a pre-test in August. When we say skill-based, it's just multiple choice. It's a very simple pre-examination. The students can sit at their laptops. Majority of the questions are going to be multiple choice, very simple. But as we move to mid-year in December, then we start to look at concept-based assessment. So they still have multiple choice. Now we're throwing in a few other diagrams that they have to move, click and drag. We're adding in a little bit more oral comprehension components of the examination, and you'll see an example of that. And what students will do during this time for oral comprehension, they're going to listen with their AirPods, earbuds, whatever they have, and they're going to listen to the story, they're going to listen to a video, they're going to listen to an audio clip, whatever it may be. And that's a good majority of their assessment. Towards the end of the year, we're slowly moving towards performance-based assessment. This past year, the language teachers actually had our students create a PowerPoint, and they had to present. I don't remember exactly how many minutes it had to be, but it had to be all in Navajo. And so they gave a presentation about, that's what it was. They had to interview an elder, they had to interview a teacher or a medicine person, and they got stories from them, we recorded them, they translated them, and then they transcribed them as well. And then they did I believe it was a 7-minute presentation on that. And so that was our first year doing this, doing an assessment like that, as part of as not as part of their final just yet. It will be part of their final this year. And so we don't want to throw everything on our students and scare them, but that is what we're moving to. And this year they're going to have a written essay component. And we like to do this because we are college prep. I know a lot of colleges still, or universities are still using, I don't know if you guys have them, those blue books. And so, yeah, I see some of you guys are smiling because you have 20 minutes, whatever it may be, you have to write it out, right? And it's all, and then this one will be all in Navajo. So, there's these components that we're consistently adding as we move forward through the year. The reason for the written essay is to help our students. We saw a lot of students, copy pasting. And so that was one of the things we had to catch quickly. We had to catch that students can easily copy homework. They can easily copy and paste. And so those are things we had to keep up and this, I know another thing that came up was AI, right? You can't use AI for Navajo. So students already know that. So But there is a program with the dictionary that does use AI. And we as teachers can easily recognize when students are using those programs. Next slide, please. So this is, I gotta look at the thing really quick. So our seniors, the beginning of the year, pre-assessment 2022, you can see that 4 students did not test. It could be a number of reasons, whatever it may be. 2 students still were at novice level. There's again a number of reasons as to why students maybe they had a bad day, maybe they just didn't want to take the exam, whatever it may be. Those students are still at that level. We do understand a lot of our students, don't want to learn Navajo as well too, but they do it minimally just to pass the exams. And so that's one of the things we're also finding. 5 students, 5 plus 3 in the gray. Those students, maybe it was 2.5 months of summer, and we see this in every grade level, not every grade level, every with every what is it called? With reading, math, science, they do have that loss over the summer. 1 student in the red with the 11, so 12 students were in an area where they were developing or merging. So they did remember a lot of the things that they learned in their junior year, but again, it wasn't. When they went to take the exam, they didn't do so well. So that is probably, if I remember the grading system, they're probably about 50%. So they were a good majority of our students were in that 50%. 6, 1, and 1, those students we would consider nearing proficiency. And so a lot of our students, not a lot of our students, our students in here, our seniors, they remember the concepts, they remembered the language, or they spoke over the summer. And so we did see these students, these are the ones that attempted our Navajo Nation bilingual still. And so those 8 students there tested for that later on. This is the end of the year post-assessment. A lot of our students, again, this is our senior class that did go through what is it called? COVID. And so they missed out. I believe generally we'd have 108 hours per school year of instruction. So for a total of 436 hours because of COVID and what we had to do, I believe their total direct teaching hours went down to 220, somewhere around there. And we can easily see that here in our data, is that if there is no direct instruction, and then also follow up with conversations or guides or criteria to help build conversations, this is where a majority of our seniors are at. But when we look at data for our juniors and our sophomores, it's a whole lot different in our freshmen. So again, direct instruction, direct contact with our students, and then giving them guidance as to how to build conversations, that's really helpful, and that's really helping for our students. And so there is a 2-part examination. I'll go back real quick. Comprehension and oral exam that we did this year. Okay. Thank you. Next slide. So this is one of our levels of assessment. I had to break down our level of assessment. So this is level 3A. There's also level 3B. The difference is, if you look at the directions and the paragraph here, that's only the paragraphs in Navajo. If we go to level 3B, directions, the paragraph, and the questions and the answer choices will all be in Navajo. And so this is really helpful for some of our students, but this is also really helpful to us as instructors, whether they understand the directions, they can read the directions, they can understand direction, they can comprehend the paragraph, and then comprehend the question that we're asking along with the answer choices. And so this particular question is talking about, what is the weather like in Farmington today? And so students, we're in Farmington, so students understand where the locations at, they understand context. And so now this is just reading, okay? There's no oral comprehension to it. They're reading, they're understanding comprehension via reading. And so the weather, what is it like today? Well, today in Dija and today in Farmington, it is sunny. And so it's right in that first sentence or that second sentence. And so students will read, and there'll be about 5-6 questions associated with this one paragraph. Next slide. Level 4 assessment. This is all in Navajo. We have a video. I believe this video was about 2 individuals going to two ladies, two auntie, grandma and her daughter, going into town to pick up food, and then they're talking about the food they will get and what they're going to cook. So there's 4 components to this oral to this video, just to hear it. Okay, so they're introducing the kinship, this and the grandmother. They're driving to a town. They're talking about food items, and then what they'll cook with those food items. So there's 4 things students have to listen to. Now, these aren't gotcha questions. We really don't want to do that, but these questions are made so that students comprehend and really listen for that specific information. So the question, what is the reason why the 2 went out to go drive? And so the answer choices are there in Navajo. Some of them are really, like fish meat, right? Fish meat is I believe one of the grandmas says she doesn't like fish meat. But again, the answer choice is there. And so having students really comprehend and really understand, we're starting to see in our data that students are comprehending a lot better. The students are comprehending so much more than they were or what our program was 4 or 5 years ago. And so that's one of our questions using the Elastic program. Next slide. So when I make all of these assessments are created by me in Elastic, I believe we have about 600, 700 questions. Each of those are made by me. And this is one of the graphics that I use in creating all of those assessment questions. Names. And so what are some names? Because I know when our students take examinations, there might be a name they might not recognize. And because of so when I create these assessment questions, I'm making it so that there are names that students recognize within community. I did get in trouble twice, not literally in trouble, but I put a name, Alice Benali, right? And so one of my students said later, that's my grandma's name. And I was like, oh no. And so, that's why I had to start going down. I had to get a little bit more, I had to start getting a little bit more detailed with some of the names. So one of the names is Benjamin Berry Blue House. And so triple B's. And so it is still a name that somebody might have, but again, it's a name that students recognize, okay? And so not a lot of our students have a lot of contact, outside the Four Corners area. So a name, let's see, Mirancita, a more Hispanic name, might not be recognizable in our area. And so just being cognizant of names like that. Spaces, where are these places occurring? We do have in our curriculum specific areas that teachers talk about. The gym, they're already identified, right? And gym space where they shoot basketball, or the fitness center where they work out with weights. And so using those spaces that students are being taught and using them here. So again, it's not a gotcha question like a random, let's go to the orthopedics office, okay? There's no random orthopedic question in there about it. That's not fair to our students. But we do also add in questions or locations that students are not specifically taught, but if they can dissect the location or the word, then they can get context and figure out what we're talking about. So one of the ways that we do is store, right? Nalyehe bahogan. Bahogan, the house for nalyehe means goods. So the house for goods is what we call store, right? So if we say another word, like let's say chiyan bahogan, right? Chiyan is food. So the house or the building for food could be just a market place where it's only food only. So that might be one. Relationships is a big one here. We really support and reinforce kinship. And so in here, in the questions, we'll say, Shamat Daisy, my mother Daisy, your aunt Bertha, your father's sister, your aunt Bertha, Nibija, okay? And so students start to figure out who or what relation they are to you, right? And so kinship is a really big part of this. Linguistic markers, we try not to stress too much on linguistic markers like critical marking, but we do tell our students to do their best, and we try our very best to ensure proper spelling and diacritical marking. In Navajo, and I'm sure it's the same with all indigenous language, if you say something wrong, it might mean something totally different, and it's going to change context and people get mad. And so socioeconomic markers is another one. We try to keep, when we do questions, we try not to add any social economic markers in there. We try to keep it as level as possible. Gender, the only time we do distinguish gender is if it's a boy, you know, or if it's a group. Only in kinship do we identify that. I know there's a big movement with LGBTQ. Navajo, and I'm pretty sure other languages don't have the gender markings that you know, like Spanish might have. Navajo is pretty fluid in terms of he, she, they, right? It's me, she. It doesn't say anything about me being a man or a boy. It just means me. You, them. That's it. She, ne, be. Me, you, them. And so we're pretty okay on that. And so only a few times where we will indicate gender is like a family member, okay? Roles, we're getting to this in terms of, I know a lot of times our students, you know, come from homes where mom or dad may not be there, right? And so this is sometimes difficult to create a question, but we do create questions that have those roles about a father or mother. Generally we'll say your grandmother, your Nolly. And so, but again, we try to really incorporate all of kinship into this. Activities, familiar activities with our students are familiar with, and then family structure and identity. So when I create an assessment, it takes me about 2 days on and off. I say generally it takes me a total about 5 hours to create a 40 question examination. Sometimes I can pull older questions in, but most of the time I have to copy and re-edit and revise. So it's consistently adapting and refining these questions to ensure that all our variables and our biases are thought of in the assessment. Are there any questions so far? I think I'm kind of going a little too fast. If not, Alani, we can move forward.
Okay, no questions yet, but I will take, we will take a pause after your last slide and offer up if there's any space for questions.
Okay, so this is our assessment level criterions. And so when our students come in, we're starting to see that pie chart on the top left-hand corner, pre-assessment. A lot of our students come in 0 to 20%. That's what, you know, that's the score that they make on our pre-assessment. That's telling us that a lot of our students don't have a lot of Navajo experience, language speaking experience. They might have come from a school that didn't offer those courses. We have a lot of our students coming in from Albuquerque, Phoenix, further border towns, and even out of state. We have students coming in from Montana and Idaho. And so they have little to no language experience, and they come to Navajo Prep for that. So this is what most students will generally look like. Then we have some students in the gray and some in the red. Then we go on to mid-year assessment, and now we start to see that color, that beautiful color wheel of there's no more students that's hitting 0 to 20. We're starting to see maybe a few still in the gray. We always have those students that always stay there. That's always going to be there. Then we have students in the red, and we have students now. We're starting to see progress. The students in yellows, and that yellow section, then the blues and the greens. By the end of the year, we start to see a lot more students proficient. We're starting to see a lot more students not proficient, that are moving to proficiency, that are doing well in their grade level. And so this was this is the legend at the bottom is what we've used, is what I'm using. And it's very similar to what the BIE already has in place, because a lot of our students come from the BIE. I know there's a lot of research, there's a lot of debate on whether or not to use colors and how to group students into colors. But for sake of identification and grades, it does help, and it does help our students. So what we ended up doing, because students didn't really understand novice, they didn't understand entering, beginning, emerging, developing, approaching, bridging, expanding, proficient, right? That's more teacher lingo. So we took a different approach, and I actually used the Mountain Way teachings. And I know this Olani wanted me to have the thing for it. I was almost done. I'm getting it done, Olani. But what we did was, in the where it says novice 0 to 19, right? In the meaning they're just now learning. It is not saying they don't know anything. They don't, because that's negative, right? So we're saying in the they're beginning their journey, their learning journey. Then entering yos, meaning they can hear it. They can now understand and distinguish the sounds. Then zip, meaning now they stood up, they can stand up at the board. They're starting to make a little bit more movement, a little bit more action in their learning. Now they're moving towards the mountain. There's a mountain in the distance. They don't see it. They don't fully see their journey, where they're going to be at, but they understand that at the end of the 4 years as a Navajo Prep senior, they're going to be able to introduce themselves. They're going to be able to carry small conversations. So that thought is out there. Now in the red, developing, now they're moving towards the mountain. They're walking towards the mountain. Okay. Now in approaching, they see the mountain in the distance. They've seen the peak over the landscape. They can see it now. They're almost there. Now in bridging, they've reached the base of that mountain. Now they can see, they have the skills, they have the energy, they have the endurance. Now as they look up the mountain, even though it can be intimidating, they're ready for it. Now on expanding, meaning they're walking up that mountain. They're making mistakes still, but their movement up the mountain, they're using the language in the community. They're using their language outside of the school, outside of the classroom. They're using the language and making mistakes. And this is where we're seeing a lot of our students. This is so beautiful to see that we've created an environment, not just for our students, but also for our staff. I had a wonderful comment yesterday where one of our staff member was saying, I don't know how to say my introduction. And one of the staff members says, well, Mr. Berlin's here, he can teach you, because that wasn't always the case. If you didn't know your introduction, people would say, what kind of Navajo are you? What kind of Indian are you? What kind of Native are you? You don't even know anything. And so that was how harsh it was, or at least how the perception of it was. But now we have staff members that are saying, I don't know my introduction. Can you teach me? And so then at the end, proficient, meaning they've reached the top of that mountain. Okay, and so that's how we identify those levels. And it says Cosette, I agree, imagine how he's, yes, canoe journey. My wife's Clinket, she's actually out there on the river, on the sea today as of right now. She's, well, actually, no, they took a day off today. They pulled, they're in Tulalip, I think, right now. So she's pulling right now. Anyways, but this analogy can be used again, whatever your culture, whatever you guys use, because I know some cultures might use a hunting approach, right? Some cultures might use the canoe journey. Other cultures might use a different corn approach for farming, whatever it may be. So again, and how we reinforce this is every year, the first sometime in the month of September, we take our students out to the mountain. And we explain this entire process, our entire school, we go up to a sacred site up the mountain. So the students are familiar with this mountain process and this mountain analogy because we're reinforcing it throughout the school year. And as a school, this is what we do, you know. Next slide.
That's the last one.
Oh, okay. Would you mind sharing the images I sent yesterday?
Yeah, so Casey, can you share that? Do you want me to put that on the screen? I think Casey's going to share that in the chat right now.
Yes, I'm putting them in the chat right now. So if people are interested in opening those up, you're welcome to do that.
Can somebody share that real quick on the screen? Yeah.
Yeah. Moment, let me stop sharing here.
So with our assessment, well, Alana gets it up. With our assessment, how do we ensure, you know, once the students take the exam, how do we interpret the data? That's probably the biggest job and the thing that we look at right now. And it was my thing over the summer is how do we look at that data? What does it look like? And you know, with NWEA, it gives you ranges, it gives you percentiles. And so that's one of the things I want to move forward towards. And so this is a beautiful chart. I just love how this chart works. So this is all of our Diné language students grouped together, okay, freshmen to seniors. And beginning of the year, where it says pre, you can see that bell curve heavily in that range of 0 to I'd say 70%, right? That heavy bell curve. And each of those lines is a student. Then mid-year, you start to see that bell curve move towards the middle. Now we're starting to see average scores of 63%. And our post, our students now, you can see that movement as a lot of our students are progressing forward. A lot of our students are at 74% average score for when we look at our students for post-assessment scores. Next image, if you can. And so when we look at this, where are levels gained and decreased? So 37 students stayed at that same level, okay? Again, it's rigorous. It's not the same instruction. It's not the same exam. It might just be difficult for students. You know, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of variables and factors that go into it. We did have 42 students go up one level. We had 26 students go up 2 levels. We had 32 students, I love that, where they jumped 3 levels or more. So they might have been at 30% in, you know, the beginning of the year, but then they went up to 60%. Again, and when you look at numbers, right, 60% might be failing, but look at that gain of knowledge. 3 levels is a lot. We had 11 students jump up 5 levels, which was amazing to me. We had 2 students jump up 7, 2 students jump up 8 levels. But we also had student 27 went down a level again too. And so we did send out a student survey, and we looked at surveys and survey questions. A lot of our students, you know, those seniors did struggle. That's where we see a lot of our students, our seniors that went through COVID, that had a whole year, half a year was just mods, an entire year was online. Their junior year was hybrid. So again, they did not have the hours, you know, for that they wanted, and they knew they some of them are kind of jealous because they're saying like the sophomores and juniors, oh, they're so lucky, they get all this good stuff, you know, they get to be in class, you know, we didn't have a teacher for a year or whatever it may be, you know, they're well aware of that, and they understand, you know, where the levels that they've dropped. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. That's our data, but again, I don't know if you guys have any questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to open it up to questions. We also have the end of event poll coming up. If you could please complete that, and then we can open it up to questions, and then we'll wrap up today's session. Any questions? You can come off of mute and ask Kevin a question.
Okay, well, you guys can have my email address. I'm gonna put that in the chat if anybody
Thank you.
wants to get a hold of us or anything. Again, we're still refining what our assessments look like. We do have to adhere to the Navajo Nation's assessment policies too. One of the things that we try not to do is teach to their exam either too. A lot of the assessment styles and assessments, the criterion is we're trying to push our students or sway our students towards IB assessment styles, and theirs is a little bit more rigorous, and so that's what we're trying to prepare our students for. And we just, and again, our students surprise us. Our students, well, they don't surprise us. We're proud of our students' accomplishments, whether it just be moving up one level, 2, 3, whatever it be. Again, it is very rigorous instruction that our students go through. And again, that year 4 is all in Navajo. So that's where our students, you know, will struggle. But again, it's not, they're not completely struggling. They do have, you know, we throw out life vests to them. They do have those, what are they called? Those little rings that they have.
Yeah, yeah.
They have them. They have the support.
Yeah.
We have a dedicated team. So thank you guys. I don't know if it's called. Thank you, Alani.
Mahalo, Kevin, for sharing. I mean, it's a great example of going from really definition of proficiency all the way into a place where you can analyze the learning going on with students and improve your program. So thank you for sharing also all of the great insights into the different biases and ways in which you are looking and creating questions. Thank you so much for that. So again, please complete the end of the event poll. Just to sort of wrap up, here are some maybe questions and think about for you as you leave this session, like what are your next steps as it's related to both language assessment? How do these ideas apply to the core content in your immersion setting? So again, really talking about what does this look like across all of the content areas that you're teaching? And then further questions, what additional support do you need in order for it that would be helpful for you to be able to do this type of work, and really being able to identify those resources. So coming up next in the NALRC series is that our next live webinar will be on native language revitalization and technology on August 3rd. Same time, we look forward to seeing you there. Please stay in touch. Here's all of the ways in which you can stay in touch, get information from us. If you have any questions, if you want to maybe talk story about an idea, please contact us and let us know. If not, have a wonderful day and thank you for joining. Take care. Aloha.